For the past 7.5 years, two men have been working to present what they believe to be their magnum opus of research. In the federal justice system, monopolistically based offenses are considered especially heinous. And in Durham, North Carolina, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Very Special Unit. These are their stories. Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about monopolies. But before we talk about monopolies, we've got to talk about why they rise. And why they rose, specifically, was the Civil War. Alright, is that good? We use this as a starting point for monopolies because the war industry was a large force in creating the economic powers that be, like new infrastructure for factories, new transportation systems, more factories, and more new transportation systems. Most of this was inevitable, but it was accelerated by the need for war industry in the Civil War. Similarly, it created heroes like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. Mr. Vanderbilt, represented by the battleship, used this event to grow his steamboat business, where he, even in wartime, ran his steamboats through the North and South. Similarly, Mr. Rockefeller, represented by the top hat, went into business not long after the war, where, in 1870, he picked up his first oil well, which he would later use to fuel not only lanterns, but also automobiles and homes, making him very rich. Except, we aren't exactly there yet, so... But, this wasn't without the technological revolution! Mr. Vanderbilt eventually reached into new areas of interest. In the case of railroads, Vanderbilt used his wealth to buy out not only one railroad, but all of them. This practice is called horizontal integration, or the act of buying up a competitor or large portion of an industry so one can make more moolah.
This technological revolution also brought up new businesses, such as J.P. Morgan. Keep it up, JP. It also brought Carnegie. Carnegie. Fascinating.
Similarly, a new era of demand was also spiked by this technological revolution, leading to industrialists like Andrew Carnegie, who was a businessman, entrepreneur, and hot dad. He, like others, gained a majority of his wealth through early investments, but especially profited from the growth of the steel industry during this time. Hey guys, it's me here with my best friend, Ulysses S. Grant. And he came from the Civil War because he was a general, too. Republican president. Wow, he loves whiskey. Grant's administration was an early sign that something was up to no good in certain American business practices. The Whiskey Trust was a collective of whiskey manufacturers that were paying off federal government employees to avoid paying certain taxes. In doing so, the trust would also blackmail or bully constituents to be quiet. When General Babcock, the leader of the ring, was arrested and charged with conspiracy to defraud the Treasury Department, the whole issue was blown open, displaying a major issue within certain American business practices.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Another strike that also happened was the Homestead strike, also by unions versus the monopolies.
Northern American factory workers were mainly united in strikes similar to the one at Homestead, but the agricultural industry was strictly controlled by their ability to transport crops and other resources to market. As a result, many railroads held firm control over the agricultural market and forced farmers to pay exorbitant amounts of money to transport such goods. However, in the Supreme Court case of Munn v. Illinois, many thought that this would be the end of such monopolistic imperialism, where the Supreme Court aimed to modify and control railroad transportation in so-called Granger laws. But these laws were too vague, and monopolies continued to control the industry. One issue these affairs did bring up was that new political parties were rising, taking care of the workers of America. The lack of anti-monopoly and trust laws was obvious to the American workers. They began to shift their focus from protesting for change and rather to running for change. Both the populist and socialist parties came to be in the next period of time, which was a direct reaction to the monopolistic control on the market and on the workers of America. Many socialists were focused in northern factories where the distribution of wealth was substantially slanted, and many populists in the South and West, where the agricultural industry was feeling the ill effects of trust-like railroad monopolies. New political parties like the Socialist Party and the Populist Party quickly rose in the ranks of American politics. This is mainly because of upset workers, like seen in the Haymarket and Homestead affairs. American politics had a couple of quick reactions to these new political parties, like the Sherman Antitrust Act. While this act did aim to dissolve monopolies and trusts, its vague wording in the words of conspiracy, colluding, and literally the word monopoly proved it to be an ineffective policy. This act just pushed American businesses from our previously stated horizontal integration to vertical integration, which meant instead of buying out other companies, they just owned the process that which companies would assure the best prices for themselves. So basically, it was nothing but appeasement to the new political party. As a result of all of these growing political parties, legislation came in the form of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which aimed to counter the trusts of the past, as seen in the whiskey trusts and other corporations that are running the consumers out of their money. Not long after the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, the economy dipped to two sketchy railroad companies' illegitimate records regarding their finances. They had essentially faked their finances to boost their market value, and this later led to longtime market investor J.P. Morgan to essentially bail out the U.S. government from this depression. This granted him great political power. Many populists and socialists would argue that this too is evidence of too much inbred political power between business and politics. Similarly, many Republicans and Democrats did not stop taking money from industrialists. Actually, in 1896, Mark Hanna took millions from industrialists' hands to fundraise for President McKinley. Mark Hanna, a longtime leader within RNC, used industrialist money to fund millions into McKinley's campaign. This was something that the Socialist and Populist parties were adamantly against due to the nature of their existence. However, the Vice President, Theodore Roosevelt, had been added to the ticket due to his large popularity and because he pounded voters within the Socialist and Populist parties, hoping that they would find more solace in a progressive vice presidential candidate. But he did! But this led to the rise of my favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was known to be adamant antitrust legislator. This man brought a lot of conflict to Republicans like Mark Hanna, who were very pro-industrialists, and was an entrance to the progressive era. Theodore saw many trusts as a way of blocking competition and ruining the livelihoods of American workers, because they had too much control and too much power over the lives of all Americans. This string of progressive presidents allowed for many trusts to be busted. And later, during Wilson's presidency, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 was passed. This allowed for stricter standards on how we review and take down trusts in the United States of America. Similarly, very soon after, where's my nail? I got my nail. Similarly, very soon after, Standard Oil was closed. What? I can't hear you over all of this hammering. It was closed. The growth of monopolies during the Gilded Age and the subsequent power gained from the Industrial Revolution led to the creation of unions such as the Knights of Labor because of the monopolies' control and manipulation of workers in the form of long workdays, little pay, and large social inequality. This led to the rise of new political parties, such as the populist and socialist parties, whose political platforms would clash with the establishment government towards compromise in a form of antitrust legislation, specifically the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and later the Clayton Act of 1914, which hoped to solve these issues by breaking down major trusts and monopolies such as Standard Oil, the Tobacco Trust, into smaller corporations such as ExxonMobil, Liggett & Myers, and R.J. Reynolds.